Shavuot Tov. Today's daf we're going to be learning is Chullin daf Pezayin. We're going to start with the bottom of yesterday's daf. So we had this situation where Rabbi Yehuda said that if you do Kisoy Adam, in the middle, you have to do for Chayot and Ofot, for undomesticated animals and birds separately. So in between you have to slaughter, then slaughter your Chayot, then cover the blood, then slaughter the birds. But came Rabbi Chanina and said, but Rabbi Yehuda doesn't think that you have to make a separate bracha for the shechita of the second set of shechitas of the birds, because you already did it with the first one, and the fact that you cover the blood in the middle is not considered a break and doesn't stop your first bracha. To which the Gemara asks, but wait, how could he say that? Because Ravina said to Ravacha, or Ravacha said to Ravashi, how is that different from this case of the students of Rav? And now we're going to see what happened with the students of Rav. They were sitting, if you remember, they were eating. I actually made one small mistake in the translation of the story of what happened. They were sitting before Rav Yeva Saba, and they said to Rav Yeva Saba, let's bench. We're finished eating. And then they themselves changed their minds and said, oh, we want to drink. And then Rav Yeva Saba said, it's too late. You already said you're going to end your meal. And therefore you have what we call Hasei Chadad, as if you made a break from your bracha in the beginning, and you can't drink anymore until you make a new bracha. So why is that any different from here, where since you already went to do some other mitzvah in the middle, you have why wouldn't you need to make a new bracha? That's where we ended. So the Gemara finishes up this section with the beginning of our daf. Hachi hashta, what you can't compare those two. Hata mishta ubruche bahadi adadi lo efshal. You can't both make a bracha and berkat hamazon. They're mutually exclusive. Sorry, you can't drink wine and make berkat hamazon at the same time. They're mutually exclusive. Either you're continuing your meal or you're ending your meal. Berkat hamazon is the end of the meal. Drinking is in the middle of your meal. You can't have both at the same time. But here you can actually do them both at the same time. Now, even though you're not doing them both at the same time, but since theoretically you could in one hand, thank God we have two hands, you could at one hand slaughter the animal, with the other hand cover the blood. And since they're both possible to happen at the same time, whereas you can't both bench and be drinking at the same time, therefore it's not considered a separation. Okay, new Mishnah. Shachat v'lo kisa v'ra'au achil chayav l'chasot. So now we're going to get into some details of covering the blood. If you slaughter and don't cover the blood, and someone else comes along and sees that you slaughter the animal and didn't cover the blood, chayav l'chasot, they are obligated to cover the blood. Kisau v'nitkale, case number 2 is you covered it, but then the wind blew and the blood became uncovered again. Patur mi l'chasot. You don't need to go back and cover it because the act of the mitzvah was already done. Third halacha, kisau ruach. What if you're missing the act of the mitzvah? The mitzvah got done by the wind. The wind blew sand, dirt onto your blood. So, and then, now it says here, chayav l'chasot, you have to cover it. Now, how can you cover it? It's already covered. So we're going to learn in the Gemara that the Rabbi Yochanan says they must be talking about if it then got uncovered. So since now, okay, in the previous case, we said, well, as long as, right, we don't care if the action's not done, as long as you did the action, even if right now it's not covered, it's okay. In that case, it's the reverse. We're going to say, listen, it was very nice while the wind covered it and it was done, but now that it got uncovered and it wasn't because of any act that you did, then you actually have to do the mitzvah. We'll get back and explain this a little bit better in the Gemara. So we're going to start with the Gemara now with the source for the first halacha. Tanu Rabbanan, and this is really about who is obligated to cover the blood. So it says, Vishafach, you spill the blood, Vikisa, so what do you learn from here? Who's obligated? Misha Shafach, Yechaseh, the one who poured the blood, that's the one who's supposed to cover the blood. But Shachat Velokisa, but what if you didn't cover the blood? Vira'ahu Achil, Minayin Shchayav L'chasot, and someone else sees. How do you know that the person who sees has to cover the blood? Shene'amal, now we're going to quote the next pasuk. After the pasuk of Kisoy Adam, it actually is an interesting pasuk because it's kind of atypical. It explains why we have this mitzvah to cover the blood. Ki nefesh kol basar damo b'nafsho, because the soul of the person is in their blood. Va'omar lebnei Yisrael. This is the part we're going to darshan. And I will tell the Jewish people, dam kol basar lo tochelu. Don't eat the blood. Ki nefesh kol basar damohu, because again the soul of the animal is its blood. Kol ochlav yikared. Anyone who eats it will get kared. Okay, this is a bit of a strange pasuk. It's basically telling you have to cover the blood because the blood can't be eaten. And then it repeats it twice why the blood can't be eaten. Okay, I'm not going to explain all the parts of this pasuk. However, one of the strange things about this pasuk is it says in the middle of the pasuk, and I will tell Bnei Yisrael. What is that? What's that coming to say? Asara l'chol b'nei Yisrael. This is a warning to all the Jews that they're obligated in this mitzvah. Okay, so it means if you see someone who slaughtered and didn't cover the blood, you have to get involved and cover the blood. Okay, Tanya Idach, second brayta we're going to quote now. V'shafach v'kisa b'masha shafach bo yechaseh. With what you spilled the blood with, meaning your hands, which is what you use to slaughter. I mean, you didn't use your hand, but use your hand to hold the knife to slaughter the animal. That's what you have to use to cover the blood, meaning cover it with your hands. Shelo yechasenu b'regel, shelo yumitzvo b'ziyot alav. You can't use your feet to cover the blood because that's disrespectful to the commandment, right? If you kick the sand with the dirt with your feet, that's not a nice way to cover it. Tanya Idach, third brayta, v'shafach v'kisa. Misha shafach hu yichasenu. Okay, again, v'shafach v'kisa starts out the way the first brayta did. The person who spills the blood, they cover it. Maaseh be'echad sheshachat v'kadam chavero v'chisa. Now we're going to get into a really interesting situation. So we already learned that the person who's supposed to slaughter, the person who slaughters is supposed to cover the blood. If they don't, someone else should come along and take care of it. But what if there was a case? Okay, they're going to explain now. But really, this brayta starts off. The real obligation is on the slaughterer. Somebody slaughtered, and their friend came along and quickly covered up the blood. And is what we call, they stole the mitzvah. Okay, you ever have this? Somebody took the mitzvah and didn't allow you to do the mitzvah, basically. Rabban Gamliel said, the person who stole the mitzvah from the other person, they covered the blood, instead of allowing the other person to do the mitzvah, they have to pay 10 gold coins. Okay, you stole the mitzvah, there's a value to that. The value is 10 gold coins. Now they ask the following question. What is the penalty for? Is it schar mitzvah? Is it because you got the reward of the mitzvah, of doing the mitzvah instead of that person? You stole the reward. O schar bracha. Or is what's bothering us is the bracha. In other words, you took away their opportunity to make a bracha. Which one? So the Gemara asks, obviously, l'may nafkamina, who cares? It's either which way. You stole the bracha or you stole the mitzvah. Either which way, it's worth 10 gold coins. What's the difference whether it's because you stole the mitzvah and they're not getting rewarded at the mitzvah, or they're not getting rewarded for making a bracha? To which the Gemara answers, l'berkat hamazon. Now you have to understand, in those days, the one who does the zimun, leads the zimun, said all the berkat hamazon, and everyone just answered amen. So what if you're sitting around and you're about to say berkat hamazon and someone starts without you? And they say berkat hamazon for everybody. So they basically stole the mitzvah from you. But they also stole the bracha from you. Now, why does it matter if we say, did they steal the mitzvah or the bracha? Well, if it's the schar mitzvah, then they basically stole the one mitzvah of, right? They stole your opportunity to say berkat hamazon, one mitzvah, 10 zehuvim, 10 gold coins. V'yamar schar bracha, but if you said it's the schar of the blessing, havyan arba'in, you have to pay 40. The person who stole it has to pay you 40 gold coins because there's 4 brachot that they stole. 4 times 10 is 40 because you should have said 4 blessings, right? So, what's the halacha? So now, to get the halacha, we bring a story. Tashma. Okay, remember, come and learn from here. Here's a story. De'amar le'ahu mina le'Rebbe. There was a heretic who said to Rebbe, the God who created the mountains didn't create the wind. The God who created the wind didn't create the mountains. Meaning, there's many gods. How do I know this? Tichtiv quotes from a pasuk from Amos that says, Ki hine yotzer harim u'borei ruach. Okay, there's the yotzer harim, the one who created the mountains, and there's the borei ruach, the one who created the winds. There you see they're listed in the pasuk as if they're 2 different people, 2 different gods. Amarle, Rabban Gamliel, Rebbe, says back to him, Shotet, you foolish person. Shapir l'sefer dikra. Go to the end of the pasuk, right? Scroll down to the end of that pasuk. What does it say at the end of the pasuk? Okay, it lists a bunch of things in that pasuk. Right? There's Yotzer Harim, Borei Ruach, Magid La'adam Masecho, etc. And then it says, Hashem Elohei Tzvaot Shemo. Who is the person who builds the mountains, who created the mountains, who created the wind? It's all God. One person. Do not look at the end of the pasuk. Amar le nekol zimna tlati yome umahadrina lach yufta. So the heretic says, listen, give me 3 days, classic in stories. I need 3 days to think about it. I'll bring you an answer. Okay, Rebbe got very nervous. Yativ Rebbe Tlata Aniyata, he fasted for 3 days. Kiava Kabai Mivra, when he was ready to sit and eat after 3 days of not eating, Amrule Mina Kaya Bava. He says, there's a min at the door, there's a heretic knocking at the door. Amar, he says, Vayinu Bevaruti Rosh. They're going to put, he quotes a pasuk which says they're going to put in my meal a very bitter herb. Okay, meaning you're ruining my dinner, right? He's about to eat it. He hasn't eaten in 3 days, and he said, I can't believe this guy's back. He's going to ruin my dinner. Amar lo. Okay, by the way, the word mivra and bevaruti, that root, we know from Sudat Havra'ah, the meal that you eat when the Avilim come home after the burial, right? It's called the Sudat Havra'ah. It comes from this word, Havra'ah, of meal. Anyway, this wasn't a Sudat Havra'ah, it was just a meal, but that's where the root is. Anyway, Amar lo, Rebbe, mevaser tovot anilach. Okay, in walks a guy, and it happens, it's not the same heretic, okay? It seems to be a heretic also, but he doesn't seem to be a very bad heretic, and we're going to see. And he says, listen, I have good news for you. Lo matzat shuva oivecha, your enemy did not find an answer. V'nafal min agag v'met, and he fell from the roof and died. Okay, usually falling from the roof is suicide. I don't know if this is suicide or not, but fact is he's dead. Okay, and don't worry, no one's going to come and answer you. Okay, it's a bit of an odd reaction, right? And it's not exactly like Rebbe's going to be so happy, I'm so glad he died. But on the other hand, he's relieved from the pressure of having to answer to him. Okay, that so far it doesn't seem to have anything to do with our situation. Amar lo, ritzon chashiv tisod etzli. Amar lo hein. He said, why don't you come eat with me? He said to this heretic. He was so happy, right? And he also wanted to eat. So the person said yes, and he ate in his house. Lachar shachlu v'shatu. After they ate and drank, Amar lo, kos shabracha tashote or be'im zuvim atan notel. Rabbi says something very interesting to the heretic. He said, do you want a kos shel bracha, meaning the cup of blessing, meaning do you want to say Birkat HaMazon? They always used to do it on a cup of wine. Or do you want 40 gold coins to replace, right? If you don't, then I'll make the bracha, but I'll pay you the compensation for you missing out the opportunity of making these brachot. There you go, there's our answer. 40 zehuvim, not 10, because it's for the 4 brachot. Amar lo, anyway, let's see what the heretic answers him. Kos shel bracha ani shoteh. He said, I'll do the bracha. Yatzda bat kol v'amra, kos shel bracha shava 40 zehuvim. And then a heavenly voice came down and said, the kos of bracha, the Birkat HaMazon, is worth 40 zehuvim, and there's your answer from there, right? Obviously, we got it ready from before, that it's the bracha that you're stealing and not the mitzvah. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, and Rabbi Yitzchak just has a last line here, which I'm not sure the significance of. In general, the story is an interesting story that requires a little bit more thinking what this is doing here. Adayin yeshna la'otam mishpacha ben gedolei Romi. That family of heretics, of the one who came to tell him the information about the one who had died, is that family still exists. They're among the great Romans. Okay, they're kind of in with the Roman family, or they're like a noble Roman family. And the name of their family is the son of Lulianus. Okay, I don't know why that's important. Now we're back to the Mishnah. If you cover it and then it got revealed, right, then you don't have to do it because you already did the mitzvah. Why is this different from returning a lost item? As it was said, Hashev afilu mea pa'amim. If you return something and it gets lost again, and you have to return it again, it keeps getting lost, you have to keep returning it. You have it over and over and over, even though you did the mitzvah already. So Amarle, and here, right, once you do it once, even if it got uncovered, you don't have to cover it again. So, right, isn't that we want the blood to be covered and we want that lost item to be in its place, right? Given back to it belongs to. Seems like the same thing. Well, Amarle, Hatam lo ktiv mi'uta, hachaktiv mi'uta v'kisahu. There it just says hashev tishivim, return it. Okay, but it just says return. It doesn't say return it. Here it says kisahu, cover it. It meaning it once, that's it. You don't have to cover it again. Okay, last part before we get to the next Mishnah. Kisau haruach. Now we have the part that I told you already that wasn't clear in the Mishnah, but we're going to quote Rabbi Yochanan. Amar Rabbi Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, Rabbi Bar Chana said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Lo shanu ela shechazar v'nitkala. If the wind covered it, and then he says, but only, this Mishnah is only, you only have to cover it yourself if it got uncovered. Aval lo chazar v'nitkala, but if it didn't get uncovered, patur milachasot, then you don't have to cover it. To which the Gemara asks, "V'chi chazar v'nitgaleh mehave ha'itchele." Say, wait a minute. If it got covered and then uncovered, why do you have to recover it? Theoretically, this should be called dachui. What's dachui? We saw this with korbanot. If you have an animal, it's supposed to go on the altar. You designate it for a sacrifice, and then somehow it gets temporarily rejected from being used for a sacrifice. You can't use it again because an animal that was rejected from the altar is rejected forever. So why don't we say the same thing about mitzvahs? If this blood was supposed to be covered, and in the end the wing covered it, at that moment the mitzvah was pushed off. It was dachui. It was rejected kind of thing. In other words, you didn't have the opportunity to fulfill the mitzvah at that point. So once that happens, theoretically, we should take away from you the opportunity to do the mitzvah any other time because the mitzvah was already rejected, so to speak. Your opportunity to do it was rejected. So now they say, Amar Rav Papa, Zot omeret, ein dichui etzel mitzvot. The fact that they actually say, no, go ahead and cover it now, is because there is no such thing as dichui by mitzvah. Okay, there's no such thing as rejecting it. How is this different from the Braita that says, if you slaughter and the blood is absorbed in the ground, you still have to cover it? Wouldn't you say that's the same thing as the wind covering it? No, hatam chisharishumoni kal. No, if you still see the blood, because if it gets absorbed in the ground, you can still see the blood at the top. It wasn't covered. Then you need to cover it. In the case with the wind blew over it, you can't see any of the blood, and therefore it's sufficient. Okay. With that, we're going to move to the next Mishnah. Dam shenitarev b'mayim. We're now going to go back to a sugya that we saw both in Zvachim and it was repeated in Menachot. Okay, but it's the same type of topic. Even our Gemara is going to bring it up after, but our Mishnah is going to start with our topic. But it's the same idea. Dam shenitarev b'mayim. We have blood that got mixed with water. Is this considered blood that you're obligated to cover? If it looks like blood, meaning it's red, then you have to cover it. If there's so much water and just a little bit of blood doesn't look red, then it's not blood and you don't have to cover it. So if it gets so diluted, then no. But if not, if it looks like blood, then you have to cover it. If it gets mixed with wine, then you look at it as if it's water, meaning, okay, now if it's mixed with wine, it's mixed with red wine. Red wine, blood, they look the same. How are you going to tell whether it looks like blood or not? So what we do is we assess. If that same amount of wine were water, would it look with the blood in, depending on how much water you have, blood you have, and depending on how much water, would the blood look like blood or not? If the answer is yes, then it's blood and you have to cover it. If not, not. Nitarev b'dam be'ema. What if it was mixed with the blood of an animal, a domesticated animal, which is not obligated to cover? Or, turning now to Amabed, o b'dam chaya, or the blood of an undomesticated animal, but which came from a live animal, okay, which wasn't obligated to cover. So we know a blood that was obligated to cover mixed with blood that wasn't. Ro'ino toki ilu mayim. Same thing as the wine. We look at the blood that wasn't obligated as if it was water. Would this look like blood then, the blood in the water, or not? And we assess. But in this case, Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, and he's loyal to his shita that we've seen in a bunch of other places. Ein dam mevatel dam. Okay, blood. By the way, we saw this in Avodah Zarah also. Blood it comes up in a lot of sugyot. Blood doesn't override blood, meaning it doesn't nullify blood. If you have blood mixed with blood, we call this min bimino. The same type, two of the same type items don't nullify each other. Why? According to Rabbi Yehuda, how does nullification work? Nullification is one thing overpowers the other. But if they're both the same, then they keep their own identity. There is no overpowering of the other and one gets absorbed in the other. They're both blood. So they still remain blood, and therefore you'll have to cover the blood no matter what. Okay, it doesn't matter what ratio is between the obligated blood and not obligated blood. And this, by the way, if you remember, the source is the Dam Hapar and the Dam Seir on Yom Kippur, that we mix them, and yet we still call them the blood of the bull and the blood of the goat. Even though the blood of the bull is obviously greater than the blood of the goat, but there's no bitul. That's where Rabbi Yehuda gets it from. Okay, dam hanitaz, blood sprinkled out a little bit, or sha'ala sakin chayav l'chasot, or if it's on the knife, that you have to collect all the blood there is and make sure it's all covered. Amar Rabbi Yehuda says, Ematai, when is this? Bizman she'en sham dam elahu. That's only if it's the only blood you have. Aval yesham dam shalohu patur milachasot. But if there is other blood, you've already fulfilled the obligation with the other blood. You don't have to cover every single little drop of blood that was blurted out somewhere else, okay, that's on the knife. No, you just need to do the mitzvah of the main blood, not the extra blood that's off to the side. Okay, T'nanatam. Now the Gemara, as I said, is going to quote this Mishnah in Zvachim. Dam shenitarev b'mayim. If blood got mixed with water, now we're going to do the same thing, but are you obligated, is it kosher to go on the altar? Or is it disqualified for going on the altar? Because once it's, right, you can't put water on the altar, so, but you have to put blood on the altar. What if it's mixed with water? Im yesh bo mara'i dam, if it looks like blood, kashel. Okay, then it's good to go on the altar because it looks like blood. We're going to call this mixture blood. Nitarev b'yayin, same thing. If you mix it with wine, same thing as in our Mishnah. We look at the wine as if it's water, if it looks like blood still, if it were to look like blood, if it were mixed with that amount of wine. If it was water, still looks like blood, we're going to treat it like blood, it goes on the altar. Not. Nitarev b'dam behema u'b'dam achaya. What if it's mixed with blood of an animal that's not a korban, that's chullin, or b'dam achaya, which can never go on the altar because no chayot, no undomesticated animals are sacrificed. Ro'ino toki'iluhu mayim. We view it again as if it's water. And then we see, right, blood and water, right, would the blood be, so the blood of the non-obligated animal in sprinkling the blood, we're going to view as water. The blood that's from the animal that's supposed to be going on the altar, if it looks like blood, that combo, then we would, if again, in imaginary terms, we view that one blood as if it's water, we view the blood that's supposed to go on the altar as if it's blood. Would the whole mixture look like blood? If so, you put it on the altar. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, ein dam mevatel dam. He says, no matter what you put on the altar, you don't have to do this test, even if it's completely diluted in the water in the other blood and wouldn't show up at all, you still put on the altar because blood is not nullified. Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba Amar Rabbi Yochanan lo shanu ela shenaflu mayim letoch dam. He says this case of saying that the blood will be nullified in the other mixture is only if, or that, flu mayim letoch dam, right? We're going to treat this as blood for the altar is only going to work if not only it looks like blood, but it was water falling into blood. Because then the water gets absorbed into the blood and the blood is the stronger one. Aval nafal dam letoch mayim, but if it was blood falling into water, what would happen? Rishon batel. We learned this in Avodah Zarah. Every drop that falls, okay, as the drop falls in, okay, this also, I think this came up in Zvachim also. Every drop that falls in, as it falls into the blood, every drop of blood that falls into the water is immediately nullified because that one drop compared to the water, it's batel. So now, every time, right, we're now pouring blood in, but as it pours, every single one, drop, batel, drop, batel. So by the time you end up with a lot of blood that maybe turned it all red, it doesn't matter because it's all nullified as it goes in. Now, the Gemara is good. So now they're going to say, Amar Rav Papa le'inyan kisoy eino kain. But this is not true for kisoy adam. Why? And I'll explain this all in a minute. Ein dichoy etzel mitzvot. This, you have to understand a few concepts here. So the first is dachoy, which we explained earlier in the daf, which is, right, there's no such issue of something being rejected where it comes to the mitzvah of kisoy adam or any mitzvah, but it is for the altar and things that can go on the altar. So now we're going to say it's like this. And the other thing you need to know is what's called choser v'ne'ol, which means ne'ol with an ayin, which means it is woken up again. If you have this blood dropping into water, what happens is, drop, every drop gets nullified. But in the end, if you have a lot of blood, it's going to be choser v'ne'ol, or it reawakens, and it's going to be blood. And if it shows up in the water, we're going to call this blood. But that only works if you hold there's no dichoy. But if you hold this dichoy, then as every drop drops in there, okay, it gets nullified. As soon as it's nullified, it can't go on the altar. It's rejected from the altar because now it's water. So there is no choser v'ne'or, but that's only where dichoy comes into effect, not a mitzvot. So it's going to be a different halacha for covering the blood as it is for sprinkling the blood on the altar. Last part for today. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Kol mareh mumit. So Rav Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, anything that looks red, this is going to sound just like our Mishnah. Michaplin, which is the Mishnah in Zvachim, You can use it for atonement, meaning it'll go on the altar because it looks red, meaning a mixture of water and blood, let's say. Umachshirin, it creates susceptibility to impurity. We didn't talk about that yet. Okay, we're going to talk about this soon. Let's just hold off for a quick minute. V'chayavim b'kisui, and you have to cover the blood. We're going to call it blood because it looks red. Okay, that's our Mishnah. So, my kamashmalan, what is it teaching us? Mechaprim tanina, chayavim b'kisui tanina. Okay, the first and the last thing on the list, we have three things. First and the last, there's already a Mishnah about it. I don't need Shmuel to come and tell me, or Rav Yehuda to quote Shmuel, saying an explicit Mishnah. So, what do they answer? Obviously, the middle one. Machshirin itzri chale. It's needed for that middle halacha. Okay, machshirin nami. Okay, wait. I don't get the machshirin. Why does Shmuel need to tell us this? Now, there's 7 liquids that if they fall on top of fruits or produce, it creates a susceptibility to impurity. Okay, some kind of produce is not going to be susceptible to impurity once it's cut off from the ground until some liquid gets upon it. That kind of finishes, makes them ready for use. Now, if you didn't get any liquid on it, then it's not. Now, the liquid has to be, because the word kiyutan, when water is put, mayim al zera, that's the pasuk, but it also is read as ki yitin, which is you put, which means you have to have intent to put, or it has to be good, it has to be water that you wanted to be there. Okay, now we're going to say like this. It's not just water, there's 7 liquids. Okay, Yad Shachat Dam is the acronym for it, to remember the 7, but we're going to talk just today about blood and water. Now, blood is one of them. That's the dam, the dalet in dam is water, and mem is mayim. Okay, blood and water are both 2 of the liquids. Okay, actually, one of the dalets is dvash, but we're not going to get to that right now. Okay, but one of the dalets is dam, and mayim is mem is mayim. So they say like this. I don't understand. Is it water? Is it blood? It doesn't make a difference. In other words, what does it say? If it looks red, then it's blood, and then it's going to be, and if it falls on produce, it's going to create susceptibility to impurity, this combo. But idam achshure machshir, imaya achshure machshire. Either which way, if it's blood or it's water, either which way, it's going to create susceptibility to impurity. So we have to find a case where it only would do it if it was blood. How can we do that? Well, I said before, you have to have intent. As soon as I put liquid in a bowl, okay, if I take, now there's certain things that are drinks, no matter what. Blood and blood is considered a drink, even though we don't really drink it. But water is not, because water could come from rainwater. It's not really neat, right? Rainwater is not really a liquid because it's not a drink unless I say I'm going to drink it. Once I put it in a vessel, it becomes a drink, and then if it falls on something, it'll create susceptibility to impurity as long as I did not want it there. Okay, like in an easier way. But if it's rainwater that comes on its own, it's not called a drink because it's rainwater, and it doesn't create susceptibility to impurity unless I wanted it to be there. I wanted it collected. Okay, so they say like this. We're talking about a case where the wine got mixed up with rainwater, okay, in this bowl. So the Gemara says, wait a minute, make shamim nami, keman deshakavarame achshavinu. Rainwater, if it's rainwater in a vessel, if I put it in the vessel, then obviously I said it was important and I want to drink it, and I called it a mashkeh already. And then, again, why do we say blood only if it's red? Even if it's clear, it would be rainwater that I put in a bowl and I already made it significant, and then if it falls on the produce, it should create susceptibility to impurity. So they say, Lo tzricha shenit medumai alehen. We're talking about a case where the blood got into the bowl, let's say, and then the rainwater came upon it. I didn't put the rainwater in the vessel. I just left it outside, and the rainwater came in. It wasn't like I wanted it to be in there. And then if it's water, and we're going to go by water because there's not a lot of blood, then we're going to call this rainwater, which I didn't collect on purpose intentionally, which means it's not going to create susceptibility and impurity when it gets on the produce. Okay, that's all because I didn't put it on the produce myself. That's one answer. Rav Asi Minaharbil gives a different answer. Omer b'tzlalata dedama. We're talking about blood plasma. Okay, the Koran has a good footnote about blood plasma if you want to understand better what it is. Is say here it's mostly a clear liquid with a yellowish hue and consists approximately 55% of the body's total blood volume. Constitutes approximately 55% of the blood's total blood volume. 90% of it is water. The rest is made of various proteins and salts. And the red part of the blood is essentially red blood cells. Okay, so there's basically a little bit of red in it. And then its separation occurs when the blood is either stagnant or it clots. And then you're going to end up with a chunk of red in there. Okay, and that's really where they were describing. They say it's actually the plasma contains a reddish hue from the blood, which is an intermediary stage. Okay, Anyway, the point is we have this yellowish stuff. It's not water. It's certainly not a liquid. I mean, it's not a liquid for drinking. It's from your body. And it has some reddish in it. Okay, it's obviously outside the body at this point. Now, we're going to say the following. So, he says, B'tzalata Didama, we're talking about that. We're not talking about liquid that's water. We're talking about it's in this blood plasma where there's a little bit of blood in this liquid. If it looks like blood, because it starts to separate, right, and you can see it red, then we're going to call this blood. If not, we're going to call it this yellowish substance, which, again, does not create susceptibility to impurity. So that's a different answer to what why it's either blood or water. It makes a difference. Because if it's water, right, if it's not blood, then we're not going to call this, it's not a liquid, because it's not one of the 7 liquids, this yellowish stuff. Rabbi Yirmiyah Midifti Amar, Anush Karet, if we're already on this blood plasma, he says, if you eat it, you're liable. Karet, v'hudi ika kezayid, as long as it has a kezayid, because for eating purposes, if you eat something and you're going to get punished, it's usually the measurement of an olive bulb. It has to be an olive bulb, most of the commentaries say of blood in it. Okay, some people say it's even an olive bulb of the blood plasma with the blood mixed in, but some people think it's just a kazayit of the blood itself. That you need that amount to be liable. In a Braita they say or actually in a Mishnah they say, we're going to see the Mishnah in a minute, that it creates impurity in a tent. If it comes from a dead body, this blood plasma, as long as there's again a revit, this is a quarter log, that's a different measurement for liquids. A quarter log of blood in it. Okay? Tanan hatam. Now we're going to quote that Mishnah, and then we're going to bring a contradiction, which we'll really get to tomorrow. Tanan hatam. So the Mishnah there says, and this is the source, Kol mashke hameh tohorim chutz midamo, v'chol mare'ad mumit shebo metamim ba'ohel. This is where it says metamim ba'ohel. So it says if you have a mashke, liquids that come out of the dead body's body, okay, if there's some secretion of liquid, it's tahor. It doesn't carry impurity of the dead, other than its blood. And any mar'ad mumit shabo, and anything that looks like blood, like this blood plasma with the red in it, mixed in would be matame ba'oel. But mashke hamet, now the Gemara says, mashke hamet torim, now they're going to ask on a different point. The liquids that come out of a dead body are pure, urimini. This contradicts the following source. Okay, we'll stop here for today. We started with that story about what's the difference between making a hefsek between the 2 shchitas by covering the blood is not going to be the same as saying I want to make a birkat hamazon and then I want to drink again. Okay, those are 2 different things because you can't both drink and say birkat hamazon at the same time, but you can do kisoy and shchita at the same time. Then we had the differences of the act of covering the blood. Who's supposed to do it? Well, the slaughterer, but if someone else does it, if the slaughterer doesn't do it, someone else who sees is obligated. But they can't steal the mitzvah. If they do, they have to compensate them. And then we said in the end it's because of the schar bracha, the bracha that they're losing out. And we saw some stories, right, that situations that highlighted that, particularly that story with the Stuki that taught us that it was 40 ziluvim because he ended up valuing the bracha at 40. Okay, then we had the different cases of what's important, the act or that it be done, right? And it depended on the scenario. Then we had the blood, what kind of blood is obligating kiso if the blood gets mixed up with some other item, and then we saw the same thing with zvachim. It's all about if you can see it, other than blood and blood, which Rabbi Yehuda doesn't think is ever batel, even though others think it could be. And then we had the statement of Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Shmuel, who said anything red has these 3 things. 2 of them we already saw in the other Mishnayot. Well, it must be the machshirin, and then we talked about what that means, what he was trying to say, because either blood or water, both should be, but we said in the end it was either, right, talking about rainwater or talking about this blood plasma. And then we went from the blood plasma, we got into the fact that it's metame in an OL, and then we just quoted the Mishnah, and we're going to have a difficulty with that, like where that source came from, and the contradiction between that and some other source. With that, wishing everyone a Shavua Tov and a good day.